Well, hello and welcome to the first episode of the Grand Campaign, a podcast that we're going to be doing that's what this episode is. We're going to be talking about why Grand Campaigns are awesome. And I've got with me today in the studio my good friend Richard and my good friend Josh.
I don't know where to look. Where's the camera?
That's right. Oh, your camera's right above me.
Okay.
So let's just kind of start by introducing ourselves. Let's start with Josh because Josh is probably a face that people recognize on the iconic channel. Josh, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Josh. I been running games for about 5 years. I'm into my third grand campaign in my homebrew world. I don't know. I'm a teacher, and I enjoy the commonalities between teaching a seminar and running a D&D table. It's just the things that I've learned from one about the other are just a ton of fun.
Well, and your campaign, Josh, it's actually one continuous campaign. You just keep
Sure.
having TPKs and start new.
One TPK,
Only
and
one.
then one TPK, and then the second one ended because the players needed an emotional break.
It's always a good sign.
I mean, a total emotional kill is it's even rarer and more prized than a TPK
That's
for
right.
sure.
Yeah, that's like when you get your human skulls from the graveyard to like put on your shelf. Like you got to get a really special one to mark that
Oh
occasion.
man, I think we learned something dark about Jay and you guys.
It's fine.
Do you have human skulls?
They are legal to own. I do not.
They're not legal to own.
The sign at the farmers market said they were completely legal to own.
Oh.
And then we've got my good friend Richard. Richard, you want to give us a little introduction?
Yeah, well, I'm Richard Rohlin. I'm a data analyst by day and then by night. Let's see,
Superhero.
Yeah, essentially. No, I've been gaming for about almost 20 years, something like that. And mostly homebrew stuff and or the one read. We'll talk more about specific games in a minute, I think.
Yeah.
But and I also am a podcaster, YouTuber. I do a Tolkien podcast called the Amonsul podcast. We talk about Tolkien, and then I'll also do something called on a channel called The Symbolic World with my friend Jonathan Peugeot. We do a series on medieval universal history. So I should say I'm a medievalist by training. So it's one of my masters
By
is in
choice.
Yes, a medievalist by training and by choice. However, since there's absolutely no money in doing that, I use those skills and that education to run really great tabletop campaigns for my friends instead.
Yeah. And you guys all know me if you have been following the Iconic channel at all or listening to the Iconic podcast. I'm JM. We do Iconic. I do Jackals. All of that things. We'll get information on where people can find you at the bottom. Richard kind of let us all know that. I realize it's early on a Saturday morning, so this is a podcast we're going to be pushing out video or audio wise to our stream as well. But this whole thing came to be because Richard and I chat ad nauseum for probably other people. For us, it's just normal. About like we talk about game design, we talk about theory, we talk about obviously Richard talks about medievalism and Tolkien. He got me way deep down the Tolkien rabbit hole. I'm now, 3 books into History of Middle-earth and loving every second of it. But really, we kept seeing all of these videos, we kept seeing all of these discussions about how, and rule sets about how gaming is disposable and consumable now. The average campaign only lasts 6 sessions. People quit around 7th level if they're going longer than that and just restart.
Do you remember where that stat is from, the 6 sessions thing? Because didn't that come from like some pretty official publication, right?
Yeah, it was from the research that Wizards of the Coast was doing.
Okay.
A big survey, and then you get things like the Lazy Dungeon Master, which is how to do no prep for your game, or some prep. Josh will push back on that a little bit. The fact that you have games like I love 13th Age, but one of the game modes is 10 sessions, 1 level session, or Shadow of the Demon Lord, which is designed for rip through your 10 sessions, start a new campaign.
Right.
And that is not how Richard or Josh and I have ever run a game.
Yeah.
And so we just thought it would be fun to talk about what a grand campaign is, why it's important to us, and make this kind of a regular feature on the channel and on our podcast. Because I think for all of us, the longer we spend in a space gaming, the richer the campaign is, both for us and our players.
Right, and the more it also, I mean, there's a richness to it, but also just becomes this more shared, like there's a shared beauty, right? You start to build a community around it. We all know that. We all know that every tabletop group is like a tiny community in a microcosm, right? But there's a difference of if, did we play, 6 sessions once a month versus have we played every 2 weeks for the last 7 years? You're going to have kind of a different kind of quality of community, of friendships.
Now, you brought up a really interesting point when we were prepping for the show about relationships and how role-playing games end up being a relationship between the GM, the table, the story, the system. Do you want to expand on that a little
Oh
bit?
man, that was a very complicated thought. Okay, so I can't even remember what I was pushing back against at the time, but there's something basically to say that the game in the book, right? So like we're playing Fading Suns. Just looking at your shelf over here. So I'm reading some Fading Suns right now. It's groovy. I'm having a good time with it. Fading Suns, as it is in the book, does not actually exist. That's somebody's idea of what a Fading Suns game might be like. Okay? But the only actual instantiations, if you wanted to use like a fancy medievalist word for this, it would be like the hypostasis of the Fading Suns game happens at the table, right? And that's a constantly dynamic, fluid thing. And this is why I get a little crosswise when people talk about games, because games don't exist. Systems exist, right? But the actual game is mediated through the game master with all the players at the table. The game master is going to, very often without even thinking consciously about it, the game master is going to choose to change things that he's doing or she's doing to meet the needs of what the players at the table, to kind of follow the story, kind of track where they're going, right? But then they're all going to actually react to the mechanics. The mechanics are going to tell them certain things about the world, and that's going to affect the way that they react. So there's this kind of dynamic, multiple part structure that is the actual game. What's in the book is just the system. But some systems, you could say, enable or support certain kinds of games more or less successfully.
Now, Josh, you had you were telling me a story about your campaign. So, Josh, again, let's start by talking a little bit about your grand campaign, because this is, again, you've been running this for 5 years. You're probably never going to step away from Gebercan. You're going to keep introducing more people to this world, and some might call the world grimdark. But you're now hitting this point that the beauty of playing a game long term in the same world with the same players, as Richard just pointed out, is sort of the relationships and the interactions as the game goes on. Now, you had a really interesting thing happen in your game where you had somebody who was a paladin of. You want to explain that story?
Yeah. So, right, this particular campaign, I built just a massive continent, and every city is fairly isolated, and the wilderness is too dangerous for there to be actual villages. So there's just these massive cities plopped down, and so we're in the borderlands at the moment, and they're all of these communities are fairly isolated. So I've run 2 other campaigns that are going on elsewhere at the same in-game time, but because they're so isolated, right, we've just got this one up in the borderlands, and it's probably the closest to like feudal Europe you're going to get in the world. There's the nobility, there's the commoners, there's maybe sort of kind of a merchant middle class. And the balance between nobles and commoners is always a problem. The nobles need to maintain their position, but also if you push too far, if you enforce certain laws too much, right? You're looking at unrest, and that's problematic, given that the entire world, the entire wilderness wants your city to be destroyed from without, and if you can't stand up to that from within, you're gone. You're going to be wiped off the map. One of the players is a noble, a paladin of Betsy Golden Shield, is this childhood hero that she's always loved. She writes fan fiction about and then burns it lest anybody ever find it. But we ran into this situation where they are out with a resource gathering caravan, and one of the other players is a noble and needed information and wasn't getting it because none of the commoners would speak to him. And so he disguised himself as a commoner and infiltrated one of the groups and tried to figure out, like, okay, is anybody else having these dark dreams that might be a threat here? Rolled real low on deception. The caravanners, the guards assumed that he was a shapeshifter invading the camp, because one of the players who leads the caravanners has them all on high alert for that kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. I could not have planned this. It's too special. And so they tackle him, hold him down, and one of them, takes out a dagger to start being like, great, who are you, what are you, where are you from, and starts like carving into him. So the player panics and says, no, like I am the son of the Caradoc house, like, get your hands off of me. And all the caravanners like froze and panicked, because to strike a noble is death. It simply is. And so they looked at each other, made a snap decision, and then tried to kill him. Because if we can kill him and spin the story, we might get out of this alive. Okay, player and another player who walked in annihilate this group of like 15 caravan guards, just as the player who runs them, I mean, he's in charge of them, walks onto the scene just in time to watch the last one like pull the sword out of this flaming sword out of the dead caravaner, and thinks that they're possessed because one of them is covered in blood and laughing maniacally. And so that is where we ended the last session. And at the beginning of the session we played last night, the rest of the caravanners show up to see what the commotion was about. And this player who plays the paladin walks in, doesn't know what's going on. She actually even missed the session before, so she really just only sees this gory scene, and is afraid that, like, is taking the temperature of the crowd, and is afraid that they're going to turn on the nobles, and maybe as a larger group just decide, we're far away from any city, these are the only two nobles, we kill them, we spin the story right, we're all fine. So she's afraid of revolt. And so the player character who leads the caravanners says, look, I know you can like detect evil and possession and things like that. Please do that here so that we can find out what's happening. And the players haven't had a time to discuss this yet, because it's all just happening in the moment and they're surrounded by the camp. So she goes out, invokes Betsy Golden Shield, and uses prestidigitation to make like her weapon and armor glow, and does not cast detect evil, and fabricates a story where, yes, what happened here was the caravanners were possessed, they attacked my noble friend because they were possessed.
Right? We're both going.
I saw Richard go, looks into him, yeah. And in short, fabricates a story and sides with the nobility for their own self-preservation against the knowledge of the commoners, which is directly opposed to all of her stories about Betsy Golden Shield. And there was just a great moment where her minder, her chaperone, essentially, this old grizzled commoner sergeant, approves. I mean, he's a commoner, but he has served the nobility all his life, and he approves, and she knows what she's done. So there was just this moment where, her chaperone is praising her for what she's done, and she is saying, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. And I ended up reducing her paladin levels from 4 to 2.
Yep.
And now she's got to kind of figure out what she knows what happened. Intuitively, I mean, even the player articulated to her chaperone why this was a problem. So I just thought it was a wonderful moment. Um, and and the player right now has investment, right? There's a story here that is entirely of her creating. I had no I never thought, I mean, I never had any idea that this would happen.
Yeah.
But it's amazing, and I don't know what to do with it yet because it happened last night. But
Well,
I'm
as you
really
said, it's
excited.
investment, right? Like,
Yeah.
I heard, I don't remember where I heard it. I think it was on Professor Dungeon Master's channel, but it was basically if you start a campaign and at the end of it, your character has received everything they wanted, has never lost a fight, and gets to the end of the campaign, none of your choices mattered.
Well, you've said something similar in your campaigns. We were doing the RuneQuest campaign, and we're like 3/4 of the way through, and you said something along the lines of, "If you are the same person at the end of this, it was a waste of time."
Yeah.
and no, I had constructed a character that I really liked, and I had all of these plans, and I really wanted all of these things to happen, and so that was really hard to hear. But I've just been thinking about that, and yeah, I really like that, and uh, I don't know, it makes it not. I think the word. I don't know if you and I were talking about this, JM, or whether it was something on like Matt Colville or something. But right, it makes it more than just a pastime.
Yes.
Right? It's just something we do to kill time. It's more than that.
So, Richard, you and I came up with the term grand campaign in our
Yes.
discussion. Do you want to define it? Like, I know we're a half hour into our show.
Yeah.
We should
Yeah.
probably define our term.
So I was actually going to say something about this, right? By grand campaign, I do not merely mean a long campaign,
Right.
because, and I just want to be clear about this. You can have a grand campaign, or you can have a campaign that's not a grand campaign, but it is a long campaign. You do a lot of prep. There's a lot of love. There's a lot of investment, right? We're not saying this is the only good kind of campaign to do, right? We're talking about a certain kind of gaming experience, which in this case, I would define it this way. It's a multi-year game, and by multi-year, I mean that it happens multiple years, both in real life and in the actual timeline of the story that you're playing out. Multiple years. Why is multiple years important? Multiple years for in real life is important because there's actually a level of investment and there's a level of interest that you don't get until you get past about the first 6 months, right? Right? You have to get past the, oh, this is new and cool, and then hit that first slump of oh, I don't know about this particular mechanic, this seems kind of grindy or whatever, and then get into, oh, man, I poured a lot of love into protecting this thing, taking care of this thing that my characters really care about, right? And now I'm invested. Now I'm here for the long haul. It needs to be multiple years, and I would even say a true grand campaign should be multiple generations within the timeline of the story, because the grand campaign is concerned with so one time I was talking to a bell maker, like a guy who makes church bells, you know. And church bells are, if anybody out there doesn't know, extremely expensive. And the reason for this is that each bell has the same amount of work and the same amount of metal put into it as every previous bell in the sequence.
Okay.
So you could say, if you said something like your first 4 bells, let's say, cost $16,000. The next bell in the set, the 5th bell, cost $16,000. The one after that cost $32,000, and so on, right? So I was talking to him about this because we were looking at...
So it's like an exponential growth.
Yes.
Okay.
So we were looking at getting, and it's because the amount of work that goes in and the amount of materials that go in, it's this each step up the rung, it's the same amount of materials and work as every previous step put together, right? And so, so I was talking to him about this, and because we were looking at getting a set for our church, and talking about budget and timeline and things like this, and he said, you don't rush this, and I'm not going to do the accent, but he's Ukrainian, so he's a very small Ukrainian man, and just kind of one of these people that just like has a kind of a, say, like a mystical air about him, and he says, when you do something, for your church, right? And it's hard for us to think of it this way in America, where we're so fluid.
Yeah.
The way that we move in and out of everything, jobs, churches, families, friendships, everything is like really, really fluid. But he's from the old world, where even now, in the 21st century, it's not too uncommon to live your entire life in the same village that you're born in, right? And he said, when you get bells, you're not getting bells for yourself. You're not even getting them for your kids. You're getting them for your grandkids, right? So a grand campaign is the kind of campaign where a player can make a decision that might not pay off for another generation or two.
Yeah.
But that they can take it on faith, and they can believe, and that belief will be kind of paid off, that at some point in this game, at some point in this campaign, I will get to see the choices that I've made. I'll get to see those things either come back to bite me really, really, really badly, or I'll see that seed that I planted blossom and bear fruit. And I think, to me, if you don't have that, I'm not going to say if you don't have that, your decision making is totally meaningless, because it's not. But I would say that's where you have the most, you could say, like the most maximal agency for a player.
Right.
And then another aspect that I've discovered in running several grand campaigns that is really cool is that you have the ability to actually sort of run multiple groups, right? And so what I would often do is I would have, like, here's my main group. You could say this is like my major league group, right? This is the group we meet regularly. In my house, we meet every 2 weeks for most things. And the reason for that pace is just because I found, as a grown-up with 5 children and lots of responsibilities, every other week is a pace that is doable.
Yeah, it's also sustainable.
Yes, sustainable. That's the thing. Like, it keeps, because most of my players are also in a similar place in life, and so we meet after the kids go to bed every other week. It's not so much that people are burning out. So I'll have this main group, right? But then people come to me, and probably come to you guys all the time, and are like, oh, I'd really like to try this thing out. I hear about these games you run. I'd really like to try this out. So what I'll do is I'll have these feeder adventures, right? And basically I just take something that's going off kind of beyond the scope of the normal player's field of vision, but like that thing that they're hearing about, right? And I'll take that thing that they're hearing about and be like, well, let's do a little 6-session mini campaign. But then I'll say, but here's the backstory, or here's the recordings, or here's the info, or whatever on the main campaign, so you kind of know what's going on in the world. And then that gives these newer players the ability and the chance to impact the larger story in a real way, but not in a way that's gonna like totally, because you want to be careful about this. You don't want your main party to feel like, well, we've invested 5 years in this, and then some guys who have been playing for a total of 3 sessions just messed up everything that we worked for, right? You can get some really bitter players doing something like that. So you want to give them agency, but not the kind of agency that would let them just like ruin everything. Like, listen, if anyone's going to ruin,
it's going to be these guys.
Those players, 5 years of effort, it's got to be them, So, yeah. But then what I found this actually does is it does 2 things. One is that sometimes there'll be overlap. Sometimes you'll have a couple of players from the main campaign who want to go do one of the side adventures. and so they'll make a new character for that.
Mhm.
And so this acts as like a feeder pool for two very important things if you're going to do a grand campaign, right? So I would say an assumption of any grand campaign is that you won't be playing the same character at the end that you started at the beginning. Like you just won't. Um, because the time wouldn't allow you to do so. Like even if everything else went fine, nothing bad happened to your character, you would age out.
Right.
Your character would age out, right? So the Darkening of Mirkwood, which is the grand campaign that I finished early last year.
Yeah.
So we went for 7 years, and over the course of 7 years, we had about 80 player characters, and about and then it took place over a course of 30 in-game years,
Yeah.
right? So everyone knew, you're going to start as an adventurer. No one can do 30 years of adventuring, right?
Right.
The PTSD alone would just be overwhelming. So everyone knew that they were going to be playing multiple characters, and so when something happened, I think it was like 15 or 16 sessions in, and most of the party, they decided to travel a bad direction, which in the One Ring RPG,
It's awful.
choosing the wrong road, that's enough to kill you,
Yeah.
right? And so all but one of them died, but everybody was okay with it because their expectation coming in was not, I'm going to play this character to the very end of the campaign. And of course, something that they enjoyed was the fact that some of those characters became, became the inspiration for 2 generations down the road. They heard the stories about how Birdsong and Alberic and everyone, they went and they died on the Old Dwarf Road and all this stuff, right? All that to say, these little feeder groups give you 2 very important things. One is they give your current main active players a source of backup characters, right? And eventually, in my tour game, the players figured out I should always have a backup character going, right? And so they would be like, hey, I want to start a backup character. Could we do like a side adventure this weekend? We do like a little 1 or 2 session thing just so they could get in the head of that character. And then that character would come into the campaign as an NPC run by me until they were ready to do the handoff, right? So they started setting up, even if they were like, they were just thinking, I think my character is going to retire in a couple of years. So they would start setting up their heir in advance so that they could pass on their treasure, pass on their objectives, things like that. Those feeder groups also serve as a valuable source of new players because over the course of a long game, some people are going to tap out, right? It could be not, and I'm not even talking about like a worst case scenario, which has basically never happened in any of my games. But just life happens, right? Life happens. People move. People have new commitments. It's new jobs and things like that. So people are going to come in and out. And I have actually had players that have come in. They played for 2 or 3 years, and then they were out for 2 or 3 years, and then they came back in and finished the campaign, and that was fine. And so the kind of feeder pool gives you a pool of people, and you can say, well, hey, listen, you already have a character in this campaign. You seem to really enjoy yourself. We have an opening. Would you be interested in joining us on Monday nights? So anyway, so to just kind of recap all of that, to me, a grand campaign is multiple year. It's got multiple, let's say, characters per player. It's multi-generational. So the decisions that I make now might affect my character's grandchildren.
Yeah.
Right. Another nice way of saying it is that if it's not possible for my character to have grandchildren,
it's probably not
a grand campaign, right? And then it's multi-group, that you actually have a kind of let's say a big sandbox where you can have multiple groups running at the same time.
Yeah, and it's not like we love the idea of the West Marches game. I think we've all talked about it.
Yes,
but it's not a West Marches.
It's not a West Marches game.
Because a West Marches game is just like, who wants to play this weekend? All right,
Right.
Pick a thread and go. Now, all right. So Josh, you've been running Gebercan. Richard has talked about his tour game as a grand campaign. For me, the 2 that I would highlight, there have been several, but like my RuneQuest game was my last. This was like day 1. I was like, you will not finish this campaign. We had multiple groups going on. We had multiple storylines, even with the main group. Richard and Ben and BC, you guys jumped in for 1 session because you happened to be there. The big siege,
Yeah, that was fun.
Just epic. But also, like, it's funny because Richard and I started talking about this right around the
Even though you made me have to fight lunars.
I did. Sorry.
We are all us.
He's he's been making me fight lunars for
Oh,
two
But
years.
but for Richard, if Richard could play anything in Glorantha, I think it would be a lunar unicorn.
yes.
A
Yeah.
lunar corn.
A lunar corn.
A lunar corn. Yeah,
All right, I'll make that happen.
I just loved them because they were the Roman Empire analog. That's
Right,
all
I
I
know.
saw when I first started. That's all I saw, and I was
That's
like,
all
I
that
want
matters. That's all that
I
matters.
want
That's all you need to know.
But Jackals, like Jackals has these rules kind of baked in. Like the idea that, hey, if you retire a character and start someone new, you get a benefit. The longer you play your character, the more the world is pushing back. Not in a, oh, hey, the monsters are tougher, but the forces of the world start to go, man, that guy keeps doing these things. Like,
Trouble seems to follow him around.
yeah. So next episode, we're actually going to talk about what we think makes a good system for this, because I think there are better systems for a grand campaign, and it's not that says that you can't do this in like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or something like that. But I think there are systems that make it easier for the GM to do this. But yeah, Josh, any comments on what
Yeah, I'm curious about as a DM. So Richard, you kind of you walked through a lot of like, as a player, this is what you get. This is what you get to do. This is what you get to think about. This is what you get to affect. I'm curious as why as a DM you guys like running grand campaigns.
start us
Okay.
off?
So do you want to know the real secret answer? Like, should I give away the secret sauce
I mean, sure. Like,
on the very first episode?
Well, I mean, like for
We should
me,
build up for like a finale.
my chalice of player tiers needs constant refilling.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, so here's the big secret. Okay, here's actually the number one amazing reason that I like running a grand campaign. So just a little bit for context, I've got I have a long campaign going right now that is set in my own homebrew world. However, I wouldn't characterize it as a grand campaign because it really is focused on a single generation, even though it's been going about 5 years. It's just focused on a single generation of characters. So I'm going to count that one out. I've got a campaign in a supers universe that I've been running for the last 16 years. We've had over 900 player characters and about 23, 24 players. Okay. Insane, right? And then we had the One Ring RPG, which went for 7 years. And then with that same group now, we picked up and we started a grand campaign set in the Fading Suns universe.
Which is just fantastic.
Which we're a year into, but I have plans. Like, I've already planned it out that it's going to be another 7-year game. So that's the reason I like this. The number one reason I like this is because I'm lazy. Okay,
it's the true lazy dungeon master.
It's the true lazy. Here's the thing. Coming up with fresh content for a one shot or for a 6-session campaign, like every 2 months, that's exhausting. But putting like a well, here's what has to happen. Here's all the natural consequences of people's actions. Here's what the bad guys want, right? And that stuff. Like, to me, that's a lot easier, right?
You do all of your you front load all of your prep keeps going for years and years.
Right. You front load all of your prep, but then each week it's not like there is an insane intense amount of prep that has to be done. So I'd say that's the number one reason is that it's actually the true prep light. It's not prep light, but it's easier to tell a good story. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It's easier to tell a good story when you just give yourself a big run up. It's the same reason that writing a compelling short story is actually harder than writing a compelling novel, right?
Because you have more time to flesh it out.
More time, you have more space, all those things.
That's really encouraging, because that's why I run. I think that's mostly why I run Sandbox, is because I don't have any faith that even if I had the time, that I could construct a story that if you follow the path will suck in my players and they'll love it and it will be this great experience. So I go, cool, I'm going to spend all of my time just enjoying building a world and characters and then I'm just going to plot players into it and see what happens. yeah, it's a little counterintuitive, but yes, because it's a lot less work.
Well, Evan in the chat had a comment on the West Marches framework, and he said the problem that I had with the West Marches framework is the answer to who wants to play was everybody's question every time, and it's true. That's the benefit of a grand campaign is because you still have a core stable of players.
Right.
But yeah, and the other thing, and we'll talk about this when we get into what resources are good for doing grand campaign. But honestly, in my RuneQuest games, so the main ones that I've run, like Jackal's RuneQuest, I would kind of call the Interstitial War that just kind of like it's not a typical. It was multi-generational, but the fact that Gygax said it's one of his most often used quotes is that if you're not keeping meticulous time
I think you
records,
mean the prophet guy.
the prophet Gygax, I'll praise his name. We don't want to. We don't want to. that may be a behind the scenes thing that we expose Josh to. No, that if you're not keeping meticulous records, specifically time records, your campaign has no meaning.
Yeah, I think it says, oh man, what is this? Without proper tracking of time, a campaign has no meaning. Something like that. I'm doing a bad job.
Blaze, isn't it in our notes down here? Game time is of utmost importance. Failure to keep careful track of time expenditure by player characters will result in many anomalies in game.
But the ability...
The stricture of time is what makes recovery of hit points meaningful.
Okay, here it is. Sorry, I just had to find it. You cannot have a meaningful campaign if strict time records are not kept.
Yeah, and part of the thing that we both do for our grand campaigns and that Josh has started doing on his Discord server is the recap. The GM writes the recap. And honestly,
this is a really important rule.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a lot about that. But honestly, it makes gaming so much easier. What am I going to do for RuneQuest tonight? Well, let me go to my consequence list, which is like all of the things that the players have done. That I'm just like, well, that's going to come back. It's just a roll table. At this point.
My session notes has a column on the right side that is just titled ongoing issues. And anything that gets resolved, I cross off, but otherwise I copy that whole list just to my next session, my next session notes, so that it's always there.
So I've always done a recap in my games. But then when I started watching Matt Colville, he started doing that when last we left our heroes. I was like, that is great. So that became like the new tagline, and I've used that for several years now. And players, this is like a fun little thing, just to let the players know how they're doing. I'll start the recap one of two ways. I'll say, when last we left our heroes, or I'll say, when last we left our heroes. And if they get it with a little question mark raised at the end, they know, oh man, we're not doing so great. And like how heroic have your actions been lately? I should say that I do run games with moral agency, right? So people can choose to, do bad things, be bad people. But I don't run evil campaigns. So like if you decide to do bad things, be bad people,
enough.
People will try to stop you. The world will try to stop you, right? And sometimes this has led to like interesting. I really like politics. So this is number two thing that I get out of running a long-term game. Okay, is that if you want politics and intrigue, right? The social pillar, if you will.
Yeah. Which thankfully she's finally no. Okay. No.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to derail JM.
It's working.
As hard as I can with stuff that's off.
Yeah, laser like the cat.
Stuff that happened on camera. So if you want good social interaction, political intrigue, those sorts of things, which are, for me, that's the bread and butter of my games. Then you need a lot of time to set it up, right? So I had famously in the Tor campaign, in the One Ring RPG campaign, there were several elections, multiple elections that were extremely contentious, and with the players having to decide, do we stay here and do we stop this guy from rigging the election, or do we try to travel across Mirkwood and find evidence that proves he's not who he says he is, knowing that if we do that, because of how long travel takes, we will not get back in time to stop him from rigging the election, right? What do we do? And this was coinciding, and I didn't set this up on purpose, but this coincided at the time of certain real-world elections. about 6 years ago. And yeah,
Something.
and after it was all kind of over and done with, Ben came to me and he was like, I was more upset about this than I was about the actual real world election, and I was like, yes. But also, I mean, so one of the great things we did was you know, the One Ring RPG focuses on different cultures in Wilderland, which is the area east of the Misty Mountains in Middle Earth. Do you have a Middle Earth map?
I don't have a Middle Earth map.
Dude, I am
Bring a Middle Earth map.
kind of scandalized and disappointed.
Yeah, I don't have one.
Yeah.
I put the old world map up, but that's not the same.
Yeah, and so one of those cultures is the Woodmen, who are very you could say like they have like a very Anglo-Saxon approach to, like, you know, every freeholder gets a vote and this kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they have a kind of like a proto-democratic system of electing they elect their own chiefs, basically.
Yeah.
And then one day this one particular guy who is kind of sort of maybe a villain, but Modred. But
Like, I remember this.
he was really
from the trauma that
Yeah.
other players were.
he was really sort of like he was a Dark Ages strongman is what he was, right? So he did some good things and some bad things. But one player, again, this is Ben in particular, hated him.
Oh yeah.
And so the players had fought at the siege of this particular steading, this hall up in the mountains, and things were looking really bad. And Modred showed up at the last moment and saved all their butts, which they're not happy about to begin with. And then he goes up to the leader of the settlement, and draws a sword, extends it towards him hilt first, and says, I'm offering you the title of Earl of Mountain Hall. Okay. Now, here's the thing. Because we've been playing for several years already, the players understood, wait a minute, women don't have earls. This guy can't give that authority. So I didn't have to say anything or like try to drive the point home. But they realized, like all of them realized, that this isn't a thing. And so if their guy, who's their friend, if he accepts this, then what he's doing is he's tacitly acknowledging that this other guy has the power to grant
Has the
that.
authority to like
Right.
grant earldom.
And this is how we get monarchies, right?
Yes.
And so they
Do you want monarchies? Because
this is how you get monarchy, right? And so he did accept it, by the way. They didn't succeed in talking him out of it, and it led to this. So the Woodmen were going down this path where Modred was like, I won't let you call me king, but I'll be prince. I'll be prince of the Woodmen. You know, very humble dude.
Yeah, totally.
And he changed his name so he had like a nicer sounding name and all this stuff. And so one of Ben's characters, what was his name? His nickname was Dead Tooth because he had a dead tooth, but I can't remember his name right now. But he just got really fed up with this, and he came up with a plan to assassinate.
So if I told you that I was behind the scenes,
Yes, I know.
Ben would come and talk about it, and I was just like, well, let's see if we can get Ben to do this. Like, I would egg him on.
Yeah.
What if he just like did it this way? Like, I would throw spaghetti at the walls to see.
Oh my gosh. And so he came up with a plan to assassinate Modred, and he tried it out, and all of the other, without really talking to the other players about it. And I think he just expected they were gonna like throw in and help out because this guy's a bad dude and all this stuff. And all the other players had to make a split decision and say, if he dies, at this point, the Woodmen descend into chaos. So, do we want to kill this guy that we really don't like? Or do we want to see everything that we worked for in this community for the last several years pay off? And they decided they needed to put the Mad Dog down. And so they put Ben's character down. And it was one of the most heartbreaking, painful,
Oh yeah.
like difficult sessions. Probably like top 2 or 3 really painful sessions in that campaign. And after it was over, I was like, okay, everyone, just take a breath. We'll talk about this tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we hung together, you know, and because everyone in that group was just a really great player.
Yeah.
And they were able to kind of, you know, like not, they're able to like be emotionally involved in the moment, but then like step back afterwards.
Yeah.
Right. If you get a player like that, hold on to that person.
Oh yeah. I was thinking about it's the same thing that happened in our RuneQuest campaign. And again, you guys, I think the 3 most important things that happened in that campaign over the course of the 4 or 5 years we played was marriages, like political marriage alliances, and they were not JM driven. They were players going, we don't have enough. We're heroes, but we can't stop X. But if we married you off to that guy, then
I'm-
together we could stop X.
Yeah.
And
I'm pretty sure the party decided that Sestapos was engaged.
long before Sestapos
like,
realized he was engaged. Because
It was
they
at the
were-
end of like session 1 or like the middle of 2 or something, and they were just like, cool, those two.
Yeah.
Okay.
But again, it also is these things where it sets up, and I think Richard very succinctly kind of defined, maybe not succinctly, but very, very well defined the Grand Campaign, because it's hard to define. It's this
Yeah.
nebulous thing. But if it's a game that's encouraging you to not just think about your decisions in the moment, but your decisions that will affect your kids in this campaign and your kids' kids in this campaign, then you've got a great campaign.
Right.
And that's what we're going to be talking about on the show.
And some people can just like role play so well in a 6-session campaign. They're like, oh, I really want to set up this community to prosper.
Mhm.
Most people, I think, do a better job of that when they think about the fact that, well, crap, I'm going to have to play that character 2 generations from now, who's going to have to deal with the consequences of my actions right now, you know.
And I think like the term you keep coming back to about seeds, I think is a very important way to look at generational campaign. Because if you're listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube or join us live in the next couple of months, what you're going to hear is, man, this sounds like a lot of work for, the payoff is going to be years down the road.
Yeah.
But that's the point.
Yeah.
The point is you plant the seeds today. If you were, it's like doing martial arts. It's like working out. You can talk about it all you want, but you're never going to see the payoff unless you actually start today. Like, don't start tomorrow, start today. Start building toward the thing you want. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. If you want to try something like this, it's very rewarding and worthwhile. And as Richard and even Josh was like talking about with his, I don't want to say his TPKs, his emotional party kill, his EPK. The EPK. We're gonna put that on a T-shirt.
It's not killed, it's just resting.
Sure. But the joy of this is
Did did your parents send it to a farm? Like,
It was a good ending to a campaign titled "It Gets Worse."
it is true.
nice.
You'll get the payoff, because even if you start this and you're like, here's what I want to do, and you lose players or your characters die, it's okay. Everyone at the table knows the game will continue, even if I have to step away,
Right.
even if my character dies. It could actually, like, we could talk about this later. It may be the stumble step that we're seeing maybe phase 4 of Marvel, and the fact that they had this generational thing going and they didn't know how to hand it off well to the next generation. But any final thoughts on the Grand Campaign before we wrap it up?
I think any thought that I start, I'm going to still be talking about for at least a good 15 minutes.
Put it in the notes for next time.
Yep.
Richard, any closing?
Yeah, I would just say, listen, we live in a world of everything is really ephemeral, and everything is, you talked about commodities and consumerism and things like early on.
Yeah.
If we sit down and we say, let's play a 6-session D&D campaign,
Mhm.
right? Apparently that's the average D&D campaign now.
You're gonna enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're gonna play for 6 sessions, right? And then we're gonna call it good, right?
Mhm.
If you do that, then what you're telling your players is, I'm going to tell you a story that will be worth 6 sessions worth of your time and your investment.
Mhm.
And after that, it's over, it's done. And that's fine. There's a place
Mhm.
for self-contained stories.
Yeah.
But too often, that's not the reason we're running these short campaigns.
Right.
Like, we're really honest with ourselves. The reason we're running short campaigns is because we're grown-ups and it's hard to coordinate schedules and it's hard to get a thing together, and then it comes around time to run and you're like, oh man, I haven't prepped for tonight, right?
Mhm.
You know, and so then you throw something together and it's kind of slipshod, and then you run the game and you have some fights and like 1 or 2 role-playing exchanges, and those get blown through because all your players do is just roll persuasion because they think it's mind control. And then I think and then so
Only we had
so
good
yes,
social.
I know.
mechanics.
Only and so you don't you don't have a 6-session campaign because you came up with this fun self-contained story that we're going to play out in exactly 6 sessions. It's because you burned out, you petered out, right? But that's because you kind of plan to fail in that way, right? And so what we want to try to do is to challenge people, to challenge game masters, to challenge players to instead plan for success, right? Let's be honest. Everyone who has gamed has either been in the game, you know, like the campaign that went for years and had all these great moments, right? You know, or wishes that they've been able to be in something like that, right? And so, so what I'm just saying is, you know, what we hope to do is to give people some help, some ideas, some tips for how they can plan to have that experience, which is going to pay off more in terms of the relationships that you build with your players. It's going to pay off more in terms of the depth and the verisimilitude of the world that you build together.
Yeah.
And it's going to pay off more in terms of that satisfying feeling. So like for the finale of my tour campaign, we rented an Airbnb by a lake, and we played for 3 days. And at the end of it all, we finished it like, you know, at the end of it all, we just kind of sat around and like everyone just like deep, expansive sigh and said, "What was a good story?" Yeah. And in a world where Disney owns everything, like every intellectual property that your kids care about and that you care about, right? Go out and tell your own story.
Yeah.
And it does, but it doesn't have to be something that peters out. It can really be something that goes the distance.
Yeah. And
I do want
Oh, go
to
for it.
actually add on to that a little bit, because what you were saying earlier, Richard, about I forget the word you used, but the word in my mind is dwell. The longer you dwell in a space, and I don't know that I can outline the, you know, the mechanically the spiritual benefits to dwelling in a space. But I think along with what Richard is saying about things are fast, things come in nice, neat little packages, things are right ephemeral. Just taking the time to dwell in a space. And sometimes it's not an amazing space. Sometimes you're dwelling in sorrow, or you're just kind of dwelling in a space where, yeah, there were some high emotions at the table last night and people are outside of the game angry at one another, right? And it's unpleasant, but that doesn't mean it's not a good place to dwell for a little bit and yeah, I think grow in some ways.
Yeah. Well, growth is an important word.
Yeah, and it goes back to our seed idea, and I think kind of picking up what you were saying, like there was a tendency for a large chunk of my life. I had a great grand campaign and didn't realize it in high school and college. For about 10 years, we ran riffs. Everyone at the table was a GM.
Yeah.
And so everyone was like, "Oh, here, this weekend, I'm going to pick up this thread and we're gonna take these characters and we're gonna continue it." And for the longest time, I always wanted to go back and be like, "How do I recapture that?" And you can't.
Yeah.
You can't, because those relationships at those moments in that time
Again,
was lightning in a bottle.
That's what you asked me that question before the coffee had really kicked in earlier, right? But that's what I mean. Like, that's the game, right? The game isn't the book.
Yeah, because let's be honest, Ritz isn't a great system,
and the game isn't even the thing that we're going to be talking about in this podcast. It's very important to understand. That's not the game.
Yeah.
The game is what happens at the table, and the stories that it produces, the growth, the personal growth, and the growth as a storyteller that it produces in you.
Yeah, and I think that's the goal, is not necessarily to recapture someone else's experience, because you can't.
Right.
But we're saying it's worthwhile. We're going to share our experiences on why it's worthwhile and how we do this. And again, the growth and the depth that you're going to get out of a grand campaign is something truly special. Like, when people ask me to define, like, what's a role-playing game like? Why do you do it? I'm like, well, we played Risk every Friday night. Sure, there may be that time where I'm like, man, I remember that time you came through Kamchatka and you rolled 3 6s. But like, when you're talking about a role-playing game, it's no shit. There we were. Richard saved my life from a dragon, and only the people at that table at that moment does that mean anything to you. You can tell the story and someone can intellectually be like, oh man, that's a great story.
Yeah.
But for those people in that moment, it was real.
This is why people don't want to hear your campaign stories.
Yeah.
And I'm always hesitant to share them, even though I have some amazing ones, right?
Yeah.
Like we all do if we've been gaming any amount of time.
Yeah.
But I'm always hesitant because it was like, you just had to be there, man.
You had to be there. And that's what we're talking about in this show. We're talking about how to make those at like their moments, but over, like, they, as Josh and Richard both said, like, they continue to build. Like the end of the interstitial war, like everyone just was like, there was this moment of catharsis at the end where everybody was like, well, that was like 10 years worth of gaming off and on in different stories that all came together, and now we're all like.
So you can think of it as simple math, right?
Yeah.
If a 6-session game gives me 1 you had to be there moment, a 60-session game might give me 10 you had to be there moments, except that it's not just linear. Like the bells, it's geometric, right? And so, because each session builds on all of the sessions that came before it, right? And so you're actually building momentum until you get to this place where the world that you're inhabiting, I like that word, Josh, where the world that you're inhabiting is this stable, beautiful, kind of very real place to you, right? And to the point where you will get a world that to you, and it's not going to feel this way to people outside the game, so you have to just be okay with that. But to you and your players, it's going to feel as real as Middle Earth, right? Or I don't know, whatever people are reading instead of Tolkien.
But also, kind of like, for like, my final thought is like, the pressure on you as a GM to run 6 sessions and be on every session for 6 sessions, that is a high bar. The other beauty of the grand campaign is you're not concerned about the individual session. You're concerned about the group average. It's more like baseball than it is like football, where you're like, well, we're going to play all of these games, and some days I may be hot as a player or as a GM, and some days I may be barely holding on. And it's okay, because the group is there for the long haul.
Some of my favorite sessions are the ones where an hour before the session I don't have anything prepped. And we went into the session and I said, okay, like, the day is yours. What are you doing? And then things just kind of happened, and it was the best session, and I had nothing planned because we had all of this history built up. Because I had a lot of world building, the players took the story away, and it was amazing.
Fortunately, I always have 1 or 2 players that I know I can count on to really screw things up, even if I'm not prepped. You guys know who you are.
Well, cool. Well, this is episode 1 of the Grand Campaign. If you're listening on watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast, thank you for doing so. Please consider subscribing. Check out all the other shows we do on the the Iconic Production channel. Do behind the scenes behind the screen twice a week, and then on the third Saturday of every month we do Exploring Glorantha. I'm going to post where you guys can find Richard. You guys, if you love Tolkien, even if you are only moderately interested in Tolkien, go check out Richard on the Almond Soul podcast. It is spectacular. And Josh will get you post your Twitter and chat there. So
because I definitely have those things.
oh, okay. Well, you gotta start putting your recaps up on like a Google page so we can link to this.
Oh, there we go. I'll make like a drive file and
yeah, there you go. All
share
right,
them that
well,
way.
thank you for doing this. I'm looking forward to next month, and we'll see you all in a month.